Welcome to your Daily Detroit for Thursday, June 11th, 2020. It's a small miracle we're getting this show out today. Jer lost power down at Daily Detroit's world headquarters in Detroit's North End. I'm Sven Gustafson, transmitting from my basement in Ferndale.
Transmitting you are, sir. I'm Jer Stays, coming to you from Cheyenne Nocerini's home studio set up in Oak Park. I'm north of 8 Mile, and Sven, I am not dissolving into dust. This is kind of crazy. On today's show, we run down 2 racially charged incidents involving the police in the suburbs. And the coronavirus shutdown could take a big chunk out of Michigan's road construction budget.
Plus, Jer speaks with Tatiana Grant. She's one of Michigan's licensed cannabis event professionals and part of a group advising Governor Gretchen Whitmer on larger events and reopening. It's an interesting conversation. Let's get started.
What you doing? Hey, man, I'm getting my license out. I'm getting my license out, bro. I am getting my license out. Hey, man, I'm getting my license out, bro. I'm getting my license out.
That's audio from dash cam footage released by the Warren Police Department after a controversial arrest of a black Amazon delivery driver emerged in a viral video. It showed the officer pinning the driver to the ground outside a home where he had just dropped off a package. Police initially stopped after they noticed the man had parked his delivery van along the curb facing the wrong direction. Fox 2 reports that Warren Police Commissioner Bill Dwyer is now recommending felony charges for the driver of resisting arrest, failing to obey a lawful command, and failure to produce a driver's license. The dashcam footage shows a police officer and the man struggling after the driver apparently went into his pocket to retrieve his license. Dwyer said he had to ask the driver 11 times for his license and urged the public not to treat the incident as a, quote, bad cop, unquote, scenario. The police officer called for backup, and another Amazon employee arrived to retrieve the delivery truck.
Meanwhile, more controversy involving police tactics, this time in Sterling Heights. There, WXYZ reports that a family has filed a federal lawsuit against the city and a police officer for wrongly arresting their son for loitering because he was black. The family says the officer put their son in a chokehold while he waited for a ride home from work from his father. The incident took place in April last year after the plaintiff, Logan Davis, was waiting under an awning in the rain after finishing his shift at Firehouse Subs. The officer demanded Davis produce his ID, then ordered him to put his hands behind his back when he asked why he needed to. A struggle ensued, and audio from the dashcam suggests the officer told Davis he was resisting arrest. Backup police soon arrived on the scene and escorted a handcuffed Davis off camera. Though it's not shown on the footage, Davis's father arrived moments later to pick up his son. Davis told WXYZ the officer held his head and neck to the ground with his arm, and he made it difficult to breathe.
Sven, I want to talk about both of these things for a second because I think there is a through line between them, and I know we wanted to talk about the story and just present the facts as they are, but I think there's a couple of thoughts that I have. Number one is that as journalists, I think we need to be a little bit skeptical of just believing the police line. We know from the report out of what happened in Minneapolis, we know from our own previous experience that oftentimes police departments don't always give you the entire story. And a lot of times you got to do some digging beyond just stenography of what these officials say.
Sure. I mean, it's journalists' job to be skeptical of all sides and try to find the truth here. I mean, we don't know everything that took place. In the case of the Warren incident, the delivery van was parked in the wrong direction. I mean, I've been actually cited, believe it or not, for when we bought our house 15 years ago, actually, we parked our moving van on the wrong side of the street and we got ticketed.
But were you arrested and thrown to the ground?
No, but the judge ended up throwing it out. But I mean, that's a quality of life thing. From the dash cam footage, it sounds like the officer was trying to explain to this Logan Davis, who was 18, that the city had an ordinance about loitering in front of closed businesses. So these are like quality of life things. It's difficult, though, to imagine, I mean, to your point, that this would have escalated if this was not a black person, frankly. I mean, these sure do smell like guilty of being black in lily white suburb type situations.
Well, and I'm extra skeptical because, I mean, cards on table, my uncle was the mayor of Sterling Heights back in the 80s.
Right.
And look, That guy was racist as hell. Like, I know this because I have an aunt who married a black man, and she literally, neither him or her could ever step into his home because of the fact that she married a black man. So, and he was part of a lot of decisions made in Sterling Heights to this day where you don't have sidewalks, you don't have a number of those things. This stuff is institutional. It goes on for years. So this is part of why I'm skeptical of many of these reports in general. We recently devoted an episode to investigating the financial hit the coronavirus pandemic could have on public schools in Michigan. But it's also likely to take a big bite out of the state's ability to do road and bridge repairs and construction. The Detroit News reports that the state expects to have enough cash to finish out the 2020 construction year, since it was mostly bid out when the stay-at-home order went into effect in March. But after that, the picture becomes uncertain. Governor Gretchen Whitmer issued her stay-at-home emergency order March 23rd. That, of course, meant a huge drop in miles driven and a lot less tax collected from sales of gasoline and diesel fuel. Revenue for the Michigan Transportation Fund dropped nearly 12% in March and 15% in April, compared to the same months in 2019, the news reports. The state's main highway repair fund is fed by state gas taxes, plus vehicle registration fees and auto dealer fees, both of which also fell after dealers were forced to close their doors. Michigan also receives about $1 billion a year from federal gasoline taxes. There are efforts by 16 states to ask the federal government to help bail out state transportation departments. We'll put a link to the Detroit News story in the show notes.
So much for fixing the damn roads, huh, Jer?
Joining me on the line is Tatiana Grant. She is the CEO of Detroit-based Cultivate MI Solutions. Tatiana, welcome to Daily Detroit.
Hello, how are you?
Good, good. So let's start with the most recent thing, is that you actually were tapped by the governor to provide some recommendations around reopening and things like that. One of the most common questions around our listeners is, what's happening with reopening? What do we need to think about? And so what were some of the things that you're looking at? And to give people background, you have a background in marijuana event organizing, which is interesting, as well as a number of other events and things like that.
Yes, absolutely. I actually am serving on a volunteer kind of work group of some of the, best and brightest, best events in Michigan. And so a friend of mine, a colleague, John Witz, we actually met a very long time ago. My first job out of college was actually the Super Bowl host committee when Super Bowl was here. So when you talk about my wide range of experience and events, but actually started with Super Bowl. In the times that we're in, John and I talk quite frequently. And while we were having a conversation, he said, hey, I'm kind of starting this group for event planning professionals for us to just be able to connect and talk through best practices in this time. And I said, yeah, I would love to join based on the work that we have been planning for the Charles H. Wright Museum. 2050 Partners, my company, has a contract with the Wright Museum for the African World Festival. And so basically, John was connected to the team at the MEDC, and they asked us as an industry to put together our recommendations that would go to the governor, very similar as to how you saw the restaurant industry putting together their recommendations on how to reopen and things of that sort. And so there's quite a few things in there, but everything as to our recommendations as how we are actually managing the entrances, how high traffic, high contact areas such as concession stands and things of that sort, how are those being sanitized? Also thinking through hand washing and things of that sort. And then, the other big thing is in regards to people's body temperatures for the actual workers and vendors. So for a lot of our events, whether it's a wedding or it's an outdoor event, like a festival, you have a ton of vendors. And the big thing is often that before you even get to the guests who are attending the event, you have these big, large teams of people who are just taking part in the production. And so making sure that those individuals are healthy, they may be asymptomatic, but there's processes that we've detailed in there to try to ensure the true health and safety of everyone that is touching these events, whether you're a worker, whether you're an attendee, whether you're one of the organizers, whatever the case may be.
So how are you feeling about events in general and the size of events and what folks are going to be able to do over the next year? And I don't know if you can share a little bit of like what are your thinking as far as plans around the scale of what can be done right now? And is that always shifting?
It's actually quite mind-boggling because as I'm doing my own research, even outside of the group that I'm on, I have been in contact and I've done a lot of online research, but I actually contacted an epidemiologist at the University of Michigan for myself. And one of the things that's interesting is that even though we have all of these precautionary measures with the hand mask and the gloves and the this and the that, the one thing that the researchers are saying is until there is a vaccine, the only real measure that seems to have the most success is social distancing. So that is where, for me as an event organizer, comes in a catch-22 as to, how much do we invest? Of course, we want the health and safety to be ensured, but, how do we put together all these measures and try to make sure people have on gloves and this and that, and maybe they're getting their body temperature scanned before they go in. But if the research is saying the only way to prevent the spread as much as possible is having people not come together, it gets to be like, okay, well, what do I do? So I think the social distancing makes sense for certain events, but then there are others, whereas having a large group like a festival, a music festival, whatever the case may be, that is part of the attraction as to why people are attending. The other interesting thing, though, is what I'm hearing and seeing myself is that some of these events are seemingly having better attendance with having an online virtual component because it may be, you just have a broader reach. So it's honestly, it's really mind-boggling. But ideally, for me and my team, what we're really looking at is following the CDC guidelines, following what Governor Whitmer outlines for us. But we will probably always try to make sure that we have a physical, socially distanced footprint, as well as an online supplemental virtual alternative for individuals who aren't comfortable with coming in contact to the physical event.
Well, there's another thing that I've kind of learned over the last few months is that I've met new people and had some better conversations virtually than I have when I've gone to events. Because I think a lot of times people go to an event and they get into the same clique that they arrived with, or they don't maybe meet as many people. And I wonder if through social distancing, not just the virtual side, but also in person, where it's like, well, we all have to be a certain amount of distance apart anyway. Maybe are there ways to kind of shuffle up people so that you're meeting and interacting with new folks?
You got it. There's actually a cannabis networking group that I'm in, and I'm very close to the founder of it. That's my homegirl. And so Jamie and I were talking, and at first we were both very bummed. One thing I didn't get a chance to share was I own 3 marketing agencies, and they all have an area of event management and production that we do. One of them is a licensed cannabis event organizer. Based on Michigan law, any event where you can consume or buy cannabis product has to now be done by a licensed event organizer. Our company, Cultivate Michigan Solutions, also we have a public-facing brand called MI 420 Events. We were scheduled to do Michigan's first licensed recreational event on April the 5th. And because of the ban, I actually received a call from the state while we were going through the permitting process 2 weeks before getting approval. And we ended up having to postpone the event. Anyway, the one thing that I shared with her is that some of her events have been so much more meaningful because I'm actually talking to people that I don't know, and I'm learning and I'm really doing the purpose of networking instead of going to an event, grabbing a drink and talking to the people that I know and not meeting new people. So you are exactly right.
Yeah, one of my mentors early on in my career, we were at one of those like fancy cocktail events, and she was like, "Get out there, go." Like you're talking to the same
Hmm.
people. And the whole night she actually like texted me and was like, "Talk to
Every
somebody new.
time.
Talk to somebody new." Like she was
Hmm.
watching me, which was first off kind of crazy, but then I will always remember that lesson because I met so many interesting people and online maybe and virtually, and maybe there's different ways to kind of prod that along. One of the things you mentioned the marijuana event organizing, and that's something that I wanted to talk about. How do you feel like this is impacting, the marijuana industry and marijuana events? Because that's something that was really starting to take flight just before the pandemic hit. Not only did Michigan's laws change, but it really seems like, up at the top with the governor, the Michigan's attitude towards some of those things and the enforcement part of it changed when it switched political parties.
So yes, we definitely have seen a shift. I would say there's still a lot of work and room to be done. As a licensed owner of an organization, there are many things that happen in the cannabis industry that I will just call it a tax. Like we call it a cannabis tax. And it's just, if you are in this industry, you're going to have to pay more for stuff. So, for instance, when you talk about events, because we were going to be the state's first licensed event, just like with any event that we would have. So, we've done Tashmoo Beer Garden on Belle Isle before.
Oh,
And
yeah,
you
that's
have to pull
beautiful.
a temporary. Oh, thank you. So, yeah, that was, we did that some years ago. And so, you had to pull a temporary event license to be able to get a liquor permit, to be able to sell your beer and stuff like that. And all of that requires you have an insurance policy. My policy to do an event with cannabis was 4 times more than it was for me to do an event with alcohol.
Wow.
So, yes, it is ridiculous the amount of money that we end up having to spend on certain things. And a lot of it is because it's not federally legal. So a lot of the big corporations, like in the insurance industry, they say that it's high risk because it's not legal and there hasn't been, a full analysis on the risk of, if someone leaves your event high and gets in the car accident, whatever the case may be. So when it comes to events, the one thing that I think is there's going to be an increase in events that are going on that are not technically going through the licensing process because it is very expensive. I mean, when I run the numbers to do an event, it's a big financial lift. Just on insurance, what we were quoted was almost $10,000.
Wow.
So you can imagine trying to duplicate that and do many events. It's quite a heavy lift. And, my company is self-funded. So for us, we do have great relationships within the industry. And so we work with brands and dispensaries and things of that sort to help offset the cost so that it's not a big burden on attendees. The good thing, though, is I do think when we are in kind of our state of new normal, to your point, because it is seemingly becoming more widely accepted in society, I think there's going to be everyone from your experienced donor who's like, yay, I can finally, smoke in public and not get in trouble or whatever the case may be. And then there's going to be your kind of curious person who's your novice, who's intrigued, but they don't know enough about it. So they want to attend events. And maybe in the world we're in now, maybe they physically don't want to go there because they still don't know where they are, but they'll go online and they'll partake. So I think those are the things that we are going to see with the industry in Michigan is that there are going to be varying levels of participation, event types. For my company, we, MI420 events, we actually are having to convert all of our events. We had a monthly event series that was supposed to kick off in April, and we are having to completely convert that to, like I said, a combination virtual and then socially distanced in person. And that's really what we are aiming for, is to be able to provide a variety in the sense of having events that people who are regular consumers will enjoy, as well as it not being too overwhelming and intimidating, and also having options for newbies, having CBD, going more into the wellness space, and introducing products and alternative medicines and things of that sort to folks.
Yeah, yeah. You're a Detroit-based company. How are you feeling about things in the city around the effect of the pandemic and events? Because, I mean, at least it seems to me, whether I've been looking at and we've been following the closure of the casinos, you got a bunch of other events, restaurants. There's so much of Detroit's nascent comeback, or whatever you want to call it, that's so dependent on events and in-person things. And it really gives me pause, frankly, as a city resident.
I think when you talk about those conversations that need to be had, I think what we have seen in Detroit, as well as other urban communities across the nation, really shows the disparities that we have in healthcare. There is clearly a direct correlation with healthcare, access to healthcare, things of that sort, in the combat of the virus. And I think, we've seen that demonstrated over the past few months. So as it relates to events and just the reopening and getting back to normal, I think the key for Detroit is going to be figuring out how to safely reopen things while providing the right environments for folks. So we have clients in my non-cannabis company, my other marketing agencies, who are severely understaffed. We have clients who are school districts, charter school districts. And as we're going through and doing their enrollment campaigns now, the reality is so many people in Detroit have been affected. There's trauma in this. And there are some families, let's say they lost a family member. Let's say they lost a husband and a father, whoever, a grandparent, whatever the case may be. These are family members who are afraid to send their kids to school in the fall. They're saying, I'm afraid to send my kid to school, so the school I choose in the fall is going to need to have some level of homeschool support, because I'm just not comfortable sending my kid to school knowing that this virus isn't under control. I think there's just going to be varying layers of the new normal, people's comfort levels. And so I think as a city and the society as a whole, that business is going to have to be adjusted. I mean, for our clients, when it comes to education, that's one of the things that we are really pushing them on is, come fall, you're not going to be able to service people the same way. As I shared, the Wright Museum is one of our clients, and we're working on the African World Festival. That was supposed to be moving to Hart Plaza this upcoming 2020 year. We've had to postpone that event. But outside of that, the other conversation that we talk to them about is, come fall, what does your field trip revenue look like? Because I have a feeling they're not going to be able to depend on that. So I think the key for Detroit as a whole, as in residents and as business owners, is going to be really, really taking a hard look at how do you move forward and adjust your business model accordingly to be able to be audience and human centered and know that things are just going to be different.
And you mentioned that thing about school buses. And in my mind, I go, okay, this is how all of this stuff starts to interlock. And I think that's something that with this pandemic world and, as we ease out of it, all of this stuff interlocks. So we've been doing a bunch of coverage on education and what will classrooms look like and education cuts and all of these things that are knock-on effects. All of this stuff links together. This is really exposing how the world is kind of very loosely threaded, but threaded together in a way that, okay, well, if you don't have in-person classes, you may or may not have field trips. And if you don't have field trips, what does that impact museums and all kinds of other things that have secondary effects? And it's something where you kind of look at the full picture and you go, wow, I'm not exactly sure what's going on in the future.
Exactly. And that's what I meant, even with events, how it's so mind-boggling, because you think the solution is this way, but then when you really think it through, it's so, to your point, it's so counter dependent that it just becomes overwhelming.
Yeah. Well, Tatiana, thank you so much for spending time with us and it is a bit overwhelming, but you definitely gave some clarity and also some insights into some corners of industry that, people may be really interested in, but they might not know how the clock ticks. So I really appreciate you.
Oh, no problem. I thank you for this time, and I hope you and your listeners stay safe.
All right, and we are done for today. If you enjoyed or found valuable what you heard today on Daily Detroit, a reminder that membership matters. In-depth stories that question what happens out there in the world, well, they are able to happen because of your membership at patreon.com/Daily Detroit. Independent funding means independent media, and, it's more crucial than ever. With that, I'm Jer Stays.
And I'm Sven Gustafson. Take care of each other, and we'll get through this whole thing together.